In the early decades of the Industrial Revolution, human productivity exploded, but a look inside the factories revealed a grim reality. Men, women, and children worked grueling hours wedged between heavy, dangerous machinery, earning barely enough to survive, while their employers accumulated vast fortunes. This massive disparity forced a reckoning with a basic question of civilization. How exactly should human society coordinate its labor and distribute its scarce resources? The first comprehensive answer arrived in 1776. In An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, Scottish philosopher Adam Smith laid out the theoretical blueprint for modern capitalism. Smith observed that if a single worker tried to make a metal pin from scratch, he might finish one a day. But if the labor was divided into specialized steps, one drawing the wire, another cutting it, a third grinding the point, a small team could produce thousands of pins in the same amount of time. To maximize this productive power on a national scale, Smith argued that an economy needed three pillars: the protection of private property, free and open markets, and individuals acting in their own rational self-interest to generate a profit. When left alone to operate, this system drove a massive surge in overall output, but structurally, it lacked any mechanism to ensure the resulting wealth was distributed evenly among the people doing the physical work. That growing inequality in the urban slums produced a radical counter-theory. By the mid-19th century, a German philosopher named Karl Marx began publishing a searing critique of the entire capitalist framework. In texts like the Communist Manifesto and his 1867 economic treatise, Das Kapital, Marx provided the intellectual architecture for a worldwide workers' revolution. This animated bar chart breaks down a worker's daily output to illustrate Marx's core mathematical critique: surplus value. He argued that the laborer is paid only a fraction of the value they actually create, just enough for basic subsistence. The remaining block of value is the surplus, which the capitalist extracts as profit. To Marx, this profit was simply unpaid labor. He described capital abstractly as dead labor. It was a force that acted like a vampire, expanding and keeping itself alive only by consuming the living labor of the working class. His solution was the complete dismantling of the free market. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx laid out specific measures to achieve this, starting with the total abolition of private property and land and the centralization of all credit and banking in the hands of the state. For decades, this conflict remained a debate between economic philosophers. But as the 20th century arrived, these two opposing theories would be tested in the real world at a massive scale. The Cold War essentially split the globe into two competing economic laboratories. The capitalist West relied on private property and market prices, while the Soviet Union and the Communist bloc implemented total state ownership. To measure the actual results of this divide, economists rely on the Madison Project database, an exhaustive historical ledger that tracks long-run economic growth and income levels across the globe. This diverging line chart illustrates the data post-1950. While the GDP per capita of the centrally planned communist nations flatlined, the economies of the Western capitalist nations broke upward, accelerating rapidly away from the rest of the world. While citizens in centrally planned economies waited in lines for basic, rationed goods, the capitalist bloc experienced extreme consumer abundance and rapid technological advancement, visible in crowded, neon-lit commercial centers like Tokyo's Ginza district. Marxism promised the ultimate egalitarian society, but in practice, state-run central planning proved completely incapable of generating the raw wealth necessary to feed and sustain its own populations. An Austrian economist named Friedrich Hayek identified exactly why this happened. He called it the information problem. Hayek argued a market price is a telecommunication system, transmitting dispersed knowledge about supply and demand faster than central authorities. He called this a marvel. A rising price naturally forces tens of thousands of strangers to use a material sparingly. Central planners simply could not calculate that massive volume of shifting data. The second structural failure of central planning was diagnosed by economist Joseph Schumpeter, who coined the term creative destruction. Capitalism demands that inefficient, obsolete industries die. That painful destruction of the old economic structure is required to free up labor and capital, allowing them to flow into faster, more efficient technological innovations. state-run systems collapsed because they lacked both mechanisms. They had no price signals to process the complex data of millions of daily interactions, and political pressure prevented them from allowing their own outdated state industries to fail. By the late 1970s, the reality of this economic failure was undeniable. For the remaining communist nations, strict adherence to Marxist economics meant facing total collapse. In 1978, Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping initiated a radical shift in policy. He decided to integrate capitalist market mechanics directly into China's Marxist political structure. Citizens were suddenly allowed to start private businesses, own property, and keep their profits, even as the state maintained ultimate authority over major infrastructure and capital allocation. The result was an explosion of economic growth that lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty. It proved that to generate actual wealth, even a state ideologically founded on Marxism had to adopt Hayek's price signals and the profit motive. But this does not mean that pure, unregulated capitalism operated flawlessly in the West. Left completely to its own devices, the free market reliably generated the exact conditions Marx had originally diagnosed: massive corporate monopolies, extreme wealth inequality, and severe exploitation of the working class. Capitalist nations survived their own internal contradictions by quietly adopting policies from the socialist playbook. Governments implemented progressive income taxation, built massive social welfare nets, and enforced strict labor laws to protect workers. The most prosperous and resilient societies existing today are not perfectly aligned with either Adam Smith or Karl Marx. They operate as carefully managed hybrids of both theories. A thriving civilization requires the raw, decentralized engine of the free market to create wealth and drive innovation, bound by the guardrails of the collective to ensure that wealth ultimately serves humanity.